All right, so right now we're gonna run Graphab, and make sure that you have installed the Java software and also the Graphab. So if you don't install the Java, the Graphab won't run at all. So make sure you do that first and then install Graphab. And also before we start, just make sure to close ArcGIS. Okay. And right now we should have our folder here and the Graphab here. So once to open Graphab, all you need to do is just double click on this file here and it should open up. And the first thing we want to set before we run Graphab is the memory. So by default, if you go to the preferences and then memory, again, so file, preferences, and then memory. By default, I believe it's 2 GB, but depending on the capacity that you have, usually it's 8 or 16 or 32. I would usually set it to at least half of your available RAM so that it will run, it has more resources to run the model. So in this case, I set to 16, but check your RAM. If let's say your RAM is 16 gigabyte, then make sure you set it to maybe 8 so that it won't crash your computer if you open other apps. All right. So once that is done, okay, click OK. And oh yeah, and the reason why is because if there's not enough memory, this error will occur. So this error message will pop up and say that out of memory. So that's why we set it to be as high as we can allocate. Once that is done, the first step we want to do is the file. Click on file and then click on new project. So here, since we're working on the spot tail quoll, so the project name will be spot tail quoll, and in this case it's V2 since it's the second time we're running. And for path, make sure you set it to as short of a path link as possible. I usually set it to my desktop, and I have a folder called WSP. So it's user and then desktop WSP, but you can also store it in desktop if that would be best as well. But I have a few files in my desktop, that's why I put it in this folder. Usually this is short enough and the model will work. Okay. Once that is done, you can see that it will create a new folder called spot tailed quoll v2. Once that is done, click next. And here we will navigate to our habitat. So it should be in our, let me go. Oh, sorry. Processing and spot tail quoll. And Graphab and habitat. So this is the habitat layer that we created just now. So in this case, it's here. Yeah. All right. And so remember why we had to reclassify the layer to 1, 2, 1, and 2 for the non-habitat and habitat. So this is the reason why, because of the patch codes. So here we will select the no data as 3, and for the habitat, it will be 2. So if you remember correctly, we've reclassified the habitat, which was previously 1, into 2. So that's why we've clicked 2 here. And for patch connexity, we select 8. This is to ensure that I believe the species can move based on the queen's movement in chess. And for minimum patch area, so let's refer back to the document. It's the minimum patch area will be 250. So we will set it to, make sure it's 250, this. And then we will uncheck the Simplify Patch for Planar Graph. Okay, this should be how our settings should look like. Don't worry, there's a screenshot in the manual, so you can refer to that as well. Okay, now I'll click Next. And for the link set, we usually rename it to be the interpatch crossing distance. So in this case, it's 15,000. So I'll put 15. Oh. And for topology, we will click Complete. And again, put the interpatch crossing distance, 15,000. Okay. And for the distance, we're going to use the cost from raster file. So let's navigate to the raster file that you've created just now. This is Spotilco. Okay. So and also make sure to check the ignore links crossing patch. All right. Again, there's many ways to do these settings, but based on multiple times that we've run this model, this is the settings that Alex and Daryl has found to work the best for the purpose of their model run. So this is the settings that I'm using, but I believe there are other ways to create different settings, but you will need to refer to the manual. Okay, so once this is done, I will click Finish. All right, so now that the first step is done, we will proceed with the second step, which is to create the graph. So here you click on Graph and then Create Graph. Here you will put the interpatch crossing distance, 15,000, and put the distance here as well. Here, 15,000. Okay. Oh, sorry. Make sure this is selected. And this is also selected. All right. Now click OK. All right, that should appear. Sometimes it may take a while, but for this case, it's quite fast. And finally, the third step is to generate the delta matrix. So you go to Metrics and Delta Matrix. And here you'll select the IIC. This is the one we usually use. And once that is done, click OK. And select the edges. So make sure that nodes and edges are selected. And once that is done, just click OK. All right, so now this is the output from Graphab. Your modeling is done. So before you close the Graphab, make sure you export these three files. So to export, you just have to click on the nodes and right click and then select export. And here I would navigate back to the project location, the one we set at the start. So that's in my desktop, WSP, and Spotilco. So I like to store it in the same folder so that it's easier to find the files. So, and here I'll just put it as IIC nodes. And make sure to select the shapefile because by default it's in GeoPackage format. It's up to you which one you prefer. So I usually select shapefile so that we can use it for other softwares outside of ArcGIS, but it's up to you. Okay, that's the nodes, and I'll do the same for the edges. As you can see here, the default is GeoPackage, so changing it to shapefile. Okay, and the same for the components as well. All right, so once that is done, you can close it, and you can view the outputs in ArcGIS. So usually what we would do is that we would open, for example, the previous map package. And I'll let this load for a while. you can see the outputs are here. So I'll just make sure to save my project as sorry, where's the Dropbox? So I'll save it to the date today. All right, and once that is done, I can replace the outputs here. So for example, the inputs, this one. So for the nodes, I would double click on this, go to source and set data source. And here I will navigate to the folder that I have just now. So in the desktop, make sure to copy. All right, and it should be replaced. I'll do the same for edges. And all the other layers. Patches, components. And this is the least cost path. So the link set 15,000. Remember the one that we set the file name just now? So this is the one. So that's the least cost paths. And once that is done, I will just replace all the other model inputs that we have. And this should be what the output would look like. Make sure that whenever we replace the data, you go to symbology and make sure you reset the values. So what I usually do is I'll just put it to 6 and then go back to 5 again. And the new updated values will be reflected. And I'll do the same for edges as well. Yep, and usually we would reduce the number of decimal points to, I think it was 4 for nodes and then 4 for edges as well, or sometimes it's 3. But that's how we process the files for Graphab, and these are the outputs. All right, one more thing that I forgot to mention is that when you need to get the Graphab matrices, for example, for these details, you can access it by going to Open Project, so File, Open Project, and navigate to the folder of your Graphab output. So in this case, I have already stored mine in my Dropbox. Processing. Okay, so let's use woodland birds as an example. If you go to the folder that you use to run Graphab, so in this case it's woodland birds version 2. What I would do is navigate to it and open this XML file. And this should pull up the outputs that you got previously. And in this case, what we want to do is we will go to the global matrices. So if you go to metrics and then go to global metrics, here you can select, for example, the mean size of components that would be accessible here. And once you click that, click OK and give it some time to calculate. And this is the output. So I would copy that and paste it in my Excel. So next would be repeat it for the size of the largest component. And there you go. All right, and for the next one, number of components. Okay, and the IIC value. As for the patches and links, that is, let me check. I think that is what we need to get from ArcGIS. But the total patch area, yeah. So okay, so those are the data that we can get from Graphab. For the patches, I'll just open up my ArcGIS and so the first one would be the number of patches. Here I would just go to the attribute table, and you can see here the number of patches is 1816. And for the links, I would go to the edges, the least cost path. It should be the same for edges and least cost path, so it's 4664. And for the total patch area, I would go to patches, and if you can see there is the area column. I would right click on it and get the statistics. And here you can get the sum of the area. I believe if you use summarize, oh no, yeah, so statistics is good enough. So here you can get the sum. And I would copy that and paste it here. So that is how we get the numbers for the table that we usually use to compile the results. Okay, hope that helps. And also just want to highlight that that's why it's very important to make sure you store the Graphab output folder in your as part of your database, and don't delete it first until you've gotten all the information that you need.